On June 21st, 1981, Major League Baseball players went on strike. This was the first extended strike in the history of Major League Baseball. 713 games were canceled. That amounted to about 38% of the regular season. This was an extremely dangerous moment for baseball. In fact, this was probably the most dangerous moment in baseball history up to this point. You see, following sports is a habit. Most fans of baseball back then had become accustomed to following the box scores every single day. Now, I can tell you this from personal experience. When you fall out of that habit, when you start doing something else with your time, it's really hard to get back into it. It's a lot harder to fall out of love with being a baseball fan than it is to get yourself back up on your feet and to go back and follow the scores every single day. Newspapers started reporting on other activities like watching old other shows and the like. And a few days after the strike, one paper reported that a radio station in San Diego had broadcast the play-by-play account of a Strat-O-Matic game. That radio station wasn't alone, actually. Look at this from the Minneapolis Star on June 16th. The Star would go on to publish Strat-O-Matic box scores for the entirety of the strike. A journalist named Glenn Guzzo, who you may have heard of, reported that baseball sim companies were worried about the strike impacting their 1981 season cards. But really, they didn't need to worry. Now, I know hindsight is always 20/20, but what these companies did not realize at the time is just how many industries relied on daily baseball games. They also didn't realize that those industries would need something to make up for the daily box scores that were no longer coming. Starting in 1976, a service called Sports Phone offered callers updated scores and sports news over the telephone. It was actually quite popular. It reached over 100,000 callers a day at its height. Now, in 1981, with baseball on strike, Sports Phone needed news to report. And so it turned to Strat-O-Matic. Sports Phone put out an advertisement on June 23rd in papers in New York City. It announced that it would report the results of a Strat-O-Matic series between the 1969 Mets and the 1978 Yankees. And word spread. Now, I know what you guys are wondering. It's the same thing that I'm wondering. Why in the world did they choose Strat-O-Matic? Why didn't they choose APA? Why didn't they choose Status Pro? Why didn't they choose the Sports Illustrated game? Why didn't they choose one of the other smaller games that were out there? Why did they choose Strat? Availability may have had something to do with it. You see, Strat-O-Matic was available at department stores in those days. While both Strat-O-Matic and APA received their share of press, you couldn't head down to the local store and buy APA. I'm not sure why Seitz did this, but he insisted on keeping his game mail order only. Now that's one of the reasons why it's easy to find Strat-O-Matic baseball board games from the 1970s and 80s on eBay. You'll usually find sets that have 4 teams, and the selection of teams seems to vary depending upon where the game was purchased. Now, it's the full season sets that are expensive, but the games themselves, not so much. And, you know, that's actually a sales model that works really well. In fact, that's how I bought my first Strat game. I bought it online from KB Toys, which I think was going out of business back then. This is around 2007. I think I paid about $5 for it plus shipping. I then redeemed the coupons that were inside the box to buy seasons at a discounted rate. Now, APA never did anything like that back in the Seitz days. So, is that the reason why Strat-O-Matic was chosen by people in the media? I've got no idea. As the summer went on, reports of Strat-O-Matic replays continued to increase. Even the Wall Street Journal reported on this phenomenon, and on the first page. The biggest hurdle to overcome was the All-Star Game, which had been scheduled for July 14th in Cleveland. And as the owners and players continued to fight, the industry came up with its own solution. To my knowledge, this is the only time that a baseball sim has had the national media spotlight like this. If we were going to retrospectively choose one of the tabletop All-Star Games to be official, it would clearly be the one that was rolled in Municipal Stadium in Cleveland.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the 1981 All-Star Game.
Bob Feller was there to roll the first dice.
Ladies and gentlemen, leading off for the National League, playing center field for the Montreal Expos, Tim Graves.
strike.
Newspapers around the country reported on the game as if it were an actual game. By the way, the National League won 15-2. I'm not kidding about this, by the way. You can check this out for yourself. Strat-O-Matic received coverage on the first page of sports sections throughout the United States and Canada. You just can't buy publicity like that. The Strat-O-Matic Review proudly reported on its front page that Strat-O-Matic was now a household word. And in retrospect, the Strat event was the only positive news for baseball that summer. In contrast, a large crowd of frustrated fans gathered outside the stadium before the game to symbolically raise their fists and boo. This really was a dark time for baseball. Now, I should note that Strat-O-Matic was not the only game used for the All-Star game that day. There was a separate All-Star game in Detroit, for example, also with Strat-O-Matic. The American League won that one 4-0. The APA Journal reported on a game played by United Press International using APA cards. The National League won that one 10-2. There was also apparently a game played in Milwaukee by a local sports journalist and none other than Bud Selig, also using APA. The National League won that one 6-4. And honestly, that's how baseball fans survived that summer of 1981. Word of a pending end to the strike came in early August. The Minneapolis Star posted its final Strat-O-Matic box score on August 3rd. The 1965 Twins beat the 1965 Dodgers 10-6 to the delight of the locals. Baseball did come back, starting with the All-Star game that was held in Cleveland on August 9th. By August 10th, things went back to normal. Well, and there you have it. Baseball survived the strike, and it was thanks in large part to Strat-O-Matic. But there's more. I suspect that Major League Baseball tried to capitalize on the obvious interest people had shown in baseball history during that period. Now, if you go through the newspapers during the strike and you look at the newspaper reports, you'll soon realize that journalists seemed a lot more interested in playing with older teams than in playing with the 1980 season cards. Well, I was really curious to see if something similar happened in 1994. Now, I remember the 1994 baseball strike, as do most of you. However, I was only 10 years old at the time. It was easy to find references to APA and Strat-O-Matic in the newspapers around the country in 1994. However, I couldn't find anything quite like the focus the national media had once had on Strat-O-Matic in 1981. Part of this may have been because the games that got the most attention in 1994 were computer games. Pressing enter doesn't quite offer the same communal experience that rolling the dice gives you. Sadly, I was unable to find any newspapers in October 1994 that played through a Fantasy World Series. The Minneapolis Star-Tribune merely printed standings and box scores from seasons gone past, with no attempt to replay or actually relive those seasons. The Daily Herald in Everett, Washington apparently played out the Seattle Mariners season using Strat-O-Matic, but that paper was a clear exception. And, in my opinion, the sport suffered as a result. Of course, that 1994 strike hurt a lot more than the 1981 strike did. Losing the World Series was a real black mark on the sport in general. Now, while many of these companies did well in 1981, they ran into extreme problems as a result of that 1994 strike, as did the baseball card industry in general. I mean, APA spiraled into its first bankruptcy, it had another one afterwards. Pursue the Pennant went completely out of business, and the industry as a whole really came close to falling apart. So was the difference between 1981 and 1994 that sports phone service? Well, I'll let you be the judge.